Hey friends, greeting from the Dan Jerusalem Hotel in Jerusalem. Looking forward to spending some time with you on today's podcast. We're talking about the Beatitudes, the blessings that God promises, that Jesus guarantees for his followers that adopt the attitudes that he expects. Don't miss it. Tune in today.
Welcome to Everyday Truth with Kurt Skelly. We believe the Bible is true and relevant to everyone, everywhere, every day. If today's conversation is a help to you, take a moment to leave a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening. Now, let's join Kurt for today's episode.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to Jerusalem, Israel. I'm standing in the courtyard of my really beautiful hotel right here. Hope you can see this. And this is the Dan Jerusalem Hotel, complete with swimming pool that none of us will be using because it is very cold outside. Jerusalem is up, it's on a mountain. So we are about 3,500 feet, even more than that, from the lowest spot in the world, which is the Dead Sea, which is just over the ridge of the Mount of Olives and down the hill. And so we are enjoying our time. Been here all day long, just wandering around the streets of Old Jerusalem, looking at the Western Wall, going through the Jewish Quarter, just enjoying, not even really our first day of touring, just kind of a get over jet lag and get acquainted day with a group of pastors. So pray for us if you would. But I didn't want to forget about you and our podcast. So we are in Matthew chapter 5. It is about 9 o'clock at night here. So that's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. So by the time you're listening to this, it was yesterday, just so you can have an idea of where I am and what I'm doing. The Sermon on the Mount, we talked about this a bit yesterday in Athens, is by far, in my opinion, the greatest message ever preached. Remember, Jesus went to this high mountain apart, and he set himself, so he sat down. The disciples came to him. We have learned that the message is primarily a message to his own followers, and he has just called formally the 12 apostles. This is about 1 year into his public ministry, but many others are there as well. And so this message may have been preached to hundreds, even perhaps thousands of people. And I'm going to demonstrate this to you a little bit next week, and that is that the mountains around the Sea of Galilee provide a natural amphitheater, even acoustics, so that it's possible without microphone, without amplification, to be heard by many, many people. And we'll demonstrate this later on in the week. It's an amazing thing. The thing I really wanted to emphasize on today's podcast, though, is the fact that the Sermon on the Mount was preached in one sitting. And if you were just to sit down and read the Sermon on the Mount out loud, not even just slowly in a regular cadence, it would take you about 15 or 20 minutes. So this wasn't a long message that Jesus preached, but what a powerful message it was. And I'm certainly not against taking extra time. We pastors do this and Bible teachers to really break down the Sermon on the Mount, to preach through each one of these really, really important verses. But there is a sense in which I think we lose the scope of a message when we just get so into the details that we forget the overall scope and sequence of the message. And I say that because we tend to do that with what we call the Beatitudes. These teachings at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount that define what the attitude of a true Christ kingdom follower will be or should be. Sometimes we'll call the Beatitudes, the blessings really is what that means, the attitudes that ought to be. And certainly that's true. So what have we learned? We've learned that Jesus is being presented as king in the book of Matthew. So in a sense, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 help us to understand what are the kingdom values that Jesus teaches. And what we're going to find in the next few episodes is that the values that Jesus prizes in his kingdom are so different from the values that we tend to value in our little kingdoms or our big kingdoms here on earth. So I want to talk about the Beatitudes, the blessed bees, which really encompasses, let me just look here at my copy of Scripture. So verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit, all the way down to verse 11, blessed are ye when men shall revile you. So all of these verses, verses 3 through 11, are the blessed are, or the blessed be verses that we call the Beatitudes. And here's what I want to say generally. You can hear the sirens and things in the background. We're in a big city, so don't be alarmed. Israel is a very, very safe place to visit. But in verses 3 through 11, Jesus gives an astounding list of where true happiness resides. Because the word blessed could easily be translated happy. Happy is the man. There's a satisfaction. There's a spiritual joy that comes when a person embraces the attitudes of verses 3 through 11. So if we were to look at the Beatitudes as a whole, what could we say about them? Well, obviously much, but let me give you 3 words that I think would really help us to understand the Beatitudes as a whole. Okay, first of all is the word internal. The attitudes all deal with internal conditions of the heart. So we think about a kingdom. The disciples fell into this trap, by the way. And we think about a kingdom and ruling and power and connection. We think about perks. We think about prestige. We think about riches. We think about comforts and ease and all the things that money and power and fame can accrue to us. But Jesus talked about none of those things. In fact, the things about which Jesus spoke here in Matthew chapter 5 were internal conditions of the heart, a poverty of spirit. In other words, a realization that there's no sufficiency in and of myself. I am not able to. I need God for. It's a poverty of spirit, an admission of insufficiency. Wow. Then it says in verse number 4, blessed are they that mourn. Well, that wouldn't seem to be a blessing back in those days. Poverty, that's not a blessing. Mourning, crying, that's not a blessing. And then it says meekness. No, that wouldn't be something that would be prized. They would view that as weakness. They would view that as servility. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst. No, that's what beggars do. Beggars hunger and thirst. Rich people have all that they can eat and more. They're all you can eat kind of people. Blessed are the merciful. No, I don't want to be merciful. I want to be in charge. I want to wield my power. And we could go on and read the rest of them, but what's the point? The point is that Jesus is pointing at the ideals of his kingdom as being attitudes of the heart. He's emphasizing that the internal, what's going on in my mind, in my heart, is really what determines my happiness, my satisfaction, my future. And that's what Jesus says to us today. It's not the circumstances around you that Jesus is trying to fix. It's the attitude in you that Jesus is speaking to. So when I think about the Beatitudes, I think about the word internal. But I also think about the word ironic. What I mean by ironic is, it's ironic that a king, and certainly Jesus is the king. Switching hands here because my arm is tired. But it's ironic. Jesus is a king, but he doesn't speak in worldly kingdom terms, like serve me, do what I say. He doesn't speak in terms of I'm at the top of the ladder, or if you serve with me and you get to rule and reign with me, here's what you're going to have, and here's what you can do, and here's who you can rule, and here are the perks that come to you. No. When Jesus speaks about kingdom values, he speaks of things like poverty and meekness and humility and persecution and meekness and mercy. These would not be our top 8 or 9 things that we would list in describing powerful people, describing well-connected people, or people that are close to the King. But that's the way Jesus describes it. In fact, the Sermon on the Mount really is indicative of all of Jesus' teaching. If you were to take all of Jesus' teaching and the various messages we have recorded, they would all find context in some way, shape, or form in the Beatitudes. So when I think about the Beatitudes, I think about the internal priority that Jesus is emphasizing. I think about the ironic emphasis of Jesus, that this doesn't sound at all like what an earthly king would say. One of the reasons we know God wrote the Bible is because man would never value these things. So I think about irony, I think about internal, but here's a good one. Ready? I think about the word inclusive. Why? Because if Jesus said that the value of the kingdom was what you have, the riches that you've accrued, the physical prowess that is yours, your smarts or your wisdom or your connectedness or your pedigree or whatever, then many of us, most of us, would be excluded from being kingdom ready, kingdom followers. But that's not what Jesus said at all. He said it's poverty of spirit, it's mercy, it's meekness, it's hungering and thirsting after righteousness. It's being willing to receive persecution and yet love instead and forgive instead. It's something anybody can do with the help of Jesus. It's something, it's an inclusivity that Jesus extends to every single person. In fact, that's why poor people more readily follow Jesus, because they have learned that they're not sufficient, that God has chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom, which he hath promised to them that love him. And the Beatitudes help us to understand that sometimes when things are going, quote unquote, wrong for us, or when we're being taught lessons about our weakness or insufficiency, those are actually good lessons, because those are the attitudes that Jesus wants us to have. Now, I will take some time in tomorrow's episode and explain each beatitude to you. Maybe not in an in-depth way, but certainly in a way that you would say, okay, if I were there on that day listening to this message where Jesus is not stopping in between every verse and giving a full Bible study, what would be the main thrust of each one of these Beatitudes? Tune in tomorrow. We'll learn all about that. For now, good night from Jerusalem. Hope you have a great day in the Lord, and we'll see you next time. God bless you, my friends.